Leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Well, the great week in British politics has begun, and I have to say, I was speculating yesterday on my Sunday show. Was this the biggest vote for 50 years since we joined what was then the Common Market, or is it the biggest vote for 80 years, namely the Norway debate back in 1940, but led to Chamberlain going and Churchill taking over? But I've been looking at it and thinking, if there really is a great plot afoot between the Speaker and Dominic Grieve and others, that they will attempt over the course of the next few days to take control of the entire parliamentary procedure away from the executive, the government, and into the hands of Parliament, maybe we're headed for the biggest constitutional crisis in this country since the 1640s, since the English Civil War. And I'm beginning to think that that may well be the case. So what has happened today? Well, Theresa May has been energetically travelling around the country. She was in Stoke-on-Trent this morning. And of course, given that the vote on her deal is going to be tomorrow night, this is the desperate last 48 hours for a Prime Minister to try and convince people to vote for her deal. Not so much on the merits of the deal. She's admitting quite publicly that it's flawed. But if you don't vote for her deal, terrible things could happen. Here she was in Stoke-on-Trent this morning.
We've never had a referendum in the United Kingdom that we've not honoured the result of. Parliament understood this fact when it voted overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50.
Did.
And both major parties did so too when they stood on election manifestos in 2017 that pledged to honour the result of the referendum. Yet, as we've seen over the last few weeks, there are some in Westminster who would wish to delay or even stop Brexit, and who will use every device available to them to do so. I ask them to consider the consequences of their actions on the faith of the British people in our democracy. What if we found ourselves in a situation where Parliament tried to take the UK out of the EU in opposition to a Remain vote? People's faith in the democratic process and their politicians would suffer catastrophic harm. We all have a duty to implement the result of the referendum.
Yes.
But while no deal remains a serious risk, having observed events at Westminster over the last 7 days, it's now my judgment that the more likely outcome is a paralysis in Parliament that risks there being no Brexit. That makes it even more important that MPs consider very carefully how they will vote tomorrow night.
You see, so much of that is what I've been saying for the last 2 years, isn't it? You know, that if it's not honoured, it would be an outrage, it would be an absolute disgrace, people's faith and trust in the system would be lost. I mean, agreed, Prime Minister. The trouble is, your deal, which is a Remainers Brexit. It's Brexit in name only at very best. It's in many ways the worst of all worlds. And she mentioned MPs voting for Article 50. And again, I laboured this point a bit yesterday morning. But the point is this. Nearly 500 MPs voted for Article 50 to be triggered, with only 100 or so MPs against it. And written into Article 50 is that we'll negotiate a withdrawal agreement once we've triggered Article 50. But if there is no withdrawal agreement, after 2 years, we leave. And that is the no deal, as it's called, Brexit. And yet the Prime Minister says today, you just heard her, that no deal represents a serious risk. So she doesn't want to leave on WTO terms. She doesn't want to recognise that if her deal goes down, the only way you can implement Brexit is to go for no deal, whatever the short-term disruptions may or may not be. But she's basically saying, vote for this, or you may not get Brexit at all. Now, on the one hand, you could say, isn't it awful that she's blackmailing us like that? But on the other, well, in a sense, she may have a point, because if this deal doesn't go through, what is Parliament actually going to do? Let's have a little listen to Jeremy Corbyn's response to all of this afternoon.
The government is in disarray. It's clear if the Prime Minister's deal is rejected tomorrow, it's time for a general election.
Please.
It's time for a new government.
Mr Corbyn keeps talking about this new general election, but there is not going to be a majority in the House of Commons for that. It ain't happening. What would be perhaps more instructive would be to know what Labour's actual position on Brexit is, because no one that's ever called this show can actually divine it. So that's where we are. So what are the risks? I mean, put yourself in the position. Put yourself tonight in the position that you're a Conservative or Labour MP. You supported Brexit. You believe in Brexit. What do you do? Do you back Mrs May's deal? And the upside, of course, is that we leave the Treaty of Rome at 11 p.m. on March 29th next year. The downside is, because of the Irish backstop and other things, we stay, frankly, as closely aligned to EU rules as we currently are. We go on paying huge sums of money, etc. Or do you say no? Actually, Mrs May's deal is not Brexit. It's nothing like the thing that people really were voting for. And you vote against it, knowing that there's a risk. And the risk is that Parliament extends Article 50, and I've been saying for the last 9 months, increasingly, that I've thought this is the most likely outcome, and I think it's now by far the most likely outcome, and perhaps risk a second referendum. What do you do? Well, one MP who's changed his mind is Sir Edward Lee. Now, I'm sure that his moving from being a flat-out opponent of Mrs May's deal to supporting it has absolutely nothing to do with him being appointed a Privy Councillor last week. I'm sure there's no connection at all with this. But Lee actually does make a very good argument. And what Lee says is that he fears that if Mrs May's deal falls, the Speaker and others will get together to try and thwart Brexit completely. So what should a Brexit MP from Labour or Tory do? Is it worth voting against Theresa May's deal and taking the risk that perhaps there'll be a second referendum or no Brexit? And if you think, actually, it's not worth the risk, Edward Lee's right, call 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think, actually, the truth of it is, Mrs May's deal is so awful that it is worth taking that risk. It's worth doing it. Text to 84850. Or maybe you think, actually, if MPs were being really honourable, they'd be going for the no-deal approach, and maybe that's what MPs should push for. Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course, Facebookers, you can talk to us too. So there have been masses of analysis today. I've just been down at College Green, and the world is there. Literally camera crews from absolutely all over the world. But of course, the people that get really left out of all of this, in a sense, are the people. Because what Parliament is doing is not so much trying to take back power from the executive, they're trying to take power back from you, because they don't respect the result. And LBC is the best platform for you to have your say. So let's get cracking. Enough of the experts, so-called. Let's speak to the real experts, the people, and let's start with Mike, a first-time caller from Millen Hall in Suffolk. Good evening, Mike, and welcome.
Well, good evening, Nigel, and it's such a pleasure to be able to speak with you. Thank you for being a man among men and being the tip of the spear, fighting the battles.
Well, that's very sweet. Now, I sense an American accent. Are you something to do with an RAF base up in Suffolk, or?
Yes.
What a good guess. Wow, I'm pleased I got that one right.
Well, thank you.
So as an American, here you are, stationed in this country, and you are witnessing the oldest functioning parliament in the world, continuous parliament in the world. All right, I know the Isle of Man say they've been a bit longer, but in reality, in terms of size, certainly, known as the mother of parliament, the country that developed parliamentary democracy and sold this concept around the world. What do you think of us, Mike, right now?
Well, to be kind, I would just call it a tragedy, like those old plays, Roman plays or Greek tragedies. It's sad to watch. Can I be really, really upfront and frank?
I don't see why not.
Okay. I benevolently call Theresa May Treason May.
Right.
And because she's an embarrassment. She's not even a good liar. When you call this Brexit, Brexit means Brexit, and, the only way is her way. It's not Brexit. And anyone that deludes themselves to think that it is just deluding themselves. They're sniffing glue or something. And to use the term no deal, that's propaganda.
Yeah.
That's political speak. There's no such thing as no deal. There's a better deal. The better deal is the World Trade Agreement. Yeah,
which saves you 39 billion quid and is a perfectly acceptable platform for most trade in the world. Mike, if you were a Tory MP and by the way, I'm going to face this at some point in the European Parliament. I may well face this same dilemma. But Mike, if you tonight were a Tory MP and you were wrestling with your conscience, knowing that if you vote against Mrs May's deal, you could finish up with a second referendum, would you still vote against Mrs May's deal?
Absolutely.
A matter of principle. Good man. Thank you very much indeed. Up to Bradford to speak to Shanjan. Shanjan, what would you do if you were in that position tonight?
To be honest, I wish I was a Conservative MP in Bradford or somewhere else in West Yorkshire, because I would be backing the deal, because this country, I'm afraid to say, is heavily divided after the referendum. And if we do not back this deal, I fear chaos and division in the months ahead.
But if we do back this deal, and, 18 months, 2 years down the road, the fishing industry and everybody else realises that actually nothing they thought they were going to achieve is going to happen, you've got the same risk in a sense, haven't you?
But the point is, at least we leave the EU with an organised exit, and the fact that we've even got, reluctant Remain organisations like Airbus backing the deal, as well as BMW. They provide tens of thousands of jobs across the UK. Somewhere, I think, near Bradford, they supply components to Airbus. If Airbus goes, that place in West Yorkshire will go. The country is divided, and I also fear that we could even play into the hands of extremists from Antifa to the EDL to even possibly Al-Qaeda. They will capitalise.
Well, I think that's a bit strong. Shanjan, do you genuinely believe that Mrs May's deal will bring the country together?
Well, I think the deal that I travel in, across West Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, and I can tell you that some parts are very hardcore Leave, some parts are hardcore Remain. I've even been told on some occasions, do not go to this place because it's hardcore Remain. People know which way I voted. I did vote to leave the EU, but I'm backing the deal because I believe the deal is good for everywhere in the country.
All right.
It's a deal good for Bradford.
Well, Shanjan, I don't agree at all. I think the deal gives the fishing industry nothing. I think the deal gives the 95% of businesses who don't trade with Europe at all and never will nothing. But hey, we agree to disagree. You put your case very passionately. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here at LBC at 16 minutes past 6, and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. The deal that MPs are going to vote on tomorrow is the withdrawal deal. That 585-page document in which we're going to give away 39 billion quid in return for, well, pretty much nothing, actually. Just a political declaration of what might happen in the years to come. And when the Prime Minister says, with this deal, we get back control of our borders, our fisheries, we don't. That's what she believes will come next, but there's no guarantee of any of it. But the absolute key part to this is the Irish backstop. And we're going back to decades of grief through that border, decades, thousands of people killed, many more thousands maimed and wounded, a peace agreement back in 1998, and the fear that if there was a hard border, a physical hard border, that might lead to fresh tensions. Just to sort of repeat this, the British government have said in no circumstances would they build a hard border. The Irish Taoiseach said the other day, if Britain leaves on WTO, he will not build a hard border. I've asked Monsieur Barnier face to face, will you build a hard border? No. So no one's going to build a hard border, but we have to have the Irish backstop in case, Martians come and build a hard border. But the problem with the backstop is this, that unless an acceptable trade deal is done over the course of the next few years, we finish up in a situation where we have a choice. Either we put Northern Ireland into a different constitutional place to the rest of the UK, or we stay trapped inside the customs union forever, and we say to ourselves, what on earth was the point of voting for Brexit? Because we're not able to make ourselves more competitive. In an attempt to try and sort of ease the pressure over the backstop, today saw an exchange of letters. A letter from the Prime Minister and a letter back from Mr Juncker and from Monsieur Barnier. I'm not going to spend any time on it because it doesn't actually change anything. Legally, what is clear after this exchange of letters is there is no way the United Kingdom can unilaterally decide to leave it, and as such, it is a trap. There is a proposal on the table tonight that maybe a sunset clause could be put on it, and I don't know. If she loses tomorrow, as she will, she's going to go back to Brussels. Believe me, that's what she says tomorrow night. I'll have a tenner with anybody that what she says tomorrow night is I'm back to Brussels to try and get concessions, all right? And that's maybe something like that is what she will try and look for. And let's see what mood the EU are in. What was interesting, though, with these letters is she addressed Mr Juncker and she also addressed Monsieur Barnier, both of them as His Excellency. I have never seen that form of words used. Perhaps I've missed it, but I haven't seen it in the 20 years that I've worked inside Brussels. They're both addressed as His Excellency, which says to me, who has got the upper hand in these negotiations? That's what it says to me. Please, if you think I'm wrong about that or right about that, then please do tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC. At LBC, your message is pouring in. Rick says, May's deal, maybe the nearest thing we can get to Brexit. That's clearly what Sir Edward Lee was thinking earlier on today. Pauline says, May's deal is keeping us in the EU. Well, yeah, not in name, Pauline, but in practice, I think it probably is. Tina says she'll respect the MPs more if they vote May's deal down. And Edward says to Corbyn, yes, of course you can have a general election anytime you like after the 29th of March when we've left. Simon says MPs should vote in line with referendum constituency results. If not, they should resign. Well, Simon, if they were doing that, Labour would have a heck of a problem, wouldn't it? Because about 70% of Labour seats in England voted leave. I'm up to Nottingham to speak to Jordan, a first-time caller. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Oh, hello, Nigel. I can't believe I'm actually on the line.
You're on LBC, Jordan, and we're imagining that you are a Tory or Labour Brexit MP and you're racking your brains tonight as to what to do tomorrow. You can vote for Mrs May's deal even though you hate it, because you may think at least that gets us out of the treaty, or you can go against it because of its possible permanence. What would you do, Jordan?
I think I would go for the first option, believe it or not, and it pains me to say that. I'm a true Brexiteer. I agree with much of what you say. And I do believe that the EU structurally can't be reformed, no matter how much pushing and shoving we want to do with it, if we did stay in. But nevertheless, this agreement is not by no means perfect by any stretch of imagination, but it's something. It's something, right? It took us 40 years to get into this mess, and me thinking long term is going to take us 40 years to get the true Brexit we really want. And I, as a voter, if I was a Conservative MP, I'll be willing to go for a minor victory for a bigger victory long term.
So, Jordan, what you're saying to me, really, is that a bad deal is better than no deal.
Look, I can't believe I'm saying this, but yes.
Oh, Jordan, what's happened to you? What do they put in the water in Nottingham to make you think that? Jordan, listen, I do understand.
I do row, actually, so there might be something in the water.
Oh, there you are. Jordan, you know, that phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal, was a phrase that I coined working with economists for Brexit during the last couple of weeks of the referendum campaign. It got picked up by the Prime Minister, but she never actually meant it. Isn't the only real, and OK, Parliament might not accept it, but isn't the only way we can deliver Brexit now is to go for we leave on WTO rules? Isn't that the only way? And here's a word, Jordan. Here's a word that no one would talk about. Everyone talks about economics. Are we going to be better off? Are we going to be worse off? Because the truth is no one knows.
That's right, yes.
The same people who said we needed to join the euro now say it would be a catastrophe to trade on WTO. But let me just throw a word in here, Jordan. Independence. The point about the Brexit vote was we voted to become an independent state. And it seems to me right now, if the Prime Minister was sincere when she says we must deliver the Brexit vote, then going for WTO now, given that time is running out, is the only way we can do it, Jordan.
No, I think I know what you're saying. I used to say to my German friend, and he's quite educated, and we have a good, Brexiteer versus Remainer conversation for the last 2 years, and I respect him a lot. And we would often say that this whole negotiation is like, do you want economic consistency, as in nothing changes, status quo stays the same, or do you want political sovereignty? And people value different things. You have the Labour government that are more worried about people's pockets and the short-term implications, when you have Brexiteers like yourself talking about those economic benefits, thinking long-term. And while that may be sound, I do realise that there are a lot of people out there that have short-term mindsets, and they're always going to be there and always going to be a thorn on people's sides.
It's also a status quo argument, Jordan, isn't it?
Yes, I realise that. You can't convince everybody, though. That's the problem.
Wilberforce was told that the abolition of the slave trade would be economically disastrous for Britain. The Corn Law. The Corn Law people. Everyone's starving because food's too expensive, but many people say we must keep the Corn Laws, otherwise it'd be terrible for our economy. So there are always arguments against change, even when change is progressive. But, Jordan, listen,
I've got an idea for you. you. This might help. This I've got an idea. Right, I remember I was watching your videos on YouTube, and you was debating what I think it was the Guy Verhofstadt deputy.
Right.
And he was, at the time, I'm about to look back, but he was threatening about pulling out of the draw agreement if at any stage we failed to keep in line with the standards of the EU. Right?
Yes.
Let's say, for instance, we, happen to not do something correctly, and all of those European bureaucrats decide to put their arms up in uproar and say, Britain isn't following the trade agreement. But I think we should chuck our toy out the pram just at the time when we want to. So we get those trade agreements that Theresa May claims we'll get.
Who says?
EU terms.
Who says?
Well, let's play the time game, see what we come up with, and then we can play it to our advantage later down the line.
Jordan, I've been playing the time game on this for 25 years. Listen, I do understand what you're saying. You're saying take the little victory, all right? I do understand that, but I think it's a pretty Pyrrhic one. Jordan, you're a star. I thank you. Some of you are getting really beaten down by this. Poor old Dave in Kingston, he's virtually given up. It's lose-lose. Brexit in name only with May's deal or no Brexit at all. The Remain Parliament have run down the clock and backed us into a no-win situation. Come on, Dave, don't give up. That's exactly what they want. But I think there are a few people like you, Dave, who are beginning to feel that. Either way, in about 24 hours, we should know exactly what's happened to Mrs May's deal. And I've had a couple of you on telling me, no, you don't like it, but you need to accept it. I still don't accept it. Convince me. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:30 in time for the news with Lisa Aziz. Now, all the way through this, the Prime Minister said something that I don't think she actually ever believed in. Here it was.
And I have always said, no deal is better than a bad.
Well, so have I.
What I have said is that no deal would be better than a bad deal.
Well, yes, of course. We all know that. Stop somebody in the street and say, hey, mate, I've got a really bad deal for you. Do you want it? Well, you know what the answer is, don't you? Yet today, it seems to me that what she's saying to everybody and urging everybody is that a bad deal is better than no deal. If this Prime Minister believed in Brexit, she would stick with what Article 50 says. And it says, by the way, 494 MPs voted for this. It says, if you cannot negotiate a withdrawal agreement 2 years after the date of triggering it, you simply leave. She isn't doing that. Graham says no deal and leaving is the only honest way forward. Now, I have to say, I believe that. Chris is the same. It's the only credible and honest way forward. MPs should vote down May's deal and hold their nerve. They should. But the trouble is, Chris, about 75% of Parliament are actually Remainers in reality. John is a first-time caller from, is it Grossmont in Yorkshire? What's the name of your town, John?
Yes. Grosmont. Yes.
Grosmont, right, I don't know it, but hey, welcome. Welcome, you're on LBC. John, what would you do tomorrow if the pressure was on your shoulders?
If I were a Conservative MP, I think my inbox would have been overflowing with emails from grassroots Conservatives reminding me that if I voted for anything other than a no-deal Brexit, I'd be out of a job at the next election. And I just don't understand what's going on here. Theresa May, I think, is more of an EU place person. Angela Leadsom stood to one side with no explanation. Remainer was put in charge, and she's gone behind the backs of all of her Brexit secretaries and done a deal with the EU on the EU's terms.
Well, I have to say, John, we would not be in this mess if it was. I see it as a catastrophic failure of leadership. All right, that's what I see, and I see into that vacuum. The establishment with their friends in big business. They've used this opportunity to try and blunt and even thwart Brexit. Whether this was all done deliberately is perhaps a separate question. John, are you a grassroots Conservative?
Yes, I am at heart, yes.
Well, you clearly get the feeling in your part of the world that actually people aren't frightened of no deal, because Mrs May today said, that it was a really unpleasant prospect.
Well, the EU, they want our trade, they want our money, they want our fish. And if we walk away, then we will get a good deal. They'll be crawling on their knees up through Downing Street. BMW, Audi, Merck, they'll all make sure of that.
John, I couldn't agree more, because that is how the real world works. John, thank you for that call. I agree with that. On Twitter, I get, if Remainers accepted the result in 2016 and put their efforts into making Brexit a success, we may be in a very different place and had better leverage. Instead, they try to sabotage it at every opportunity. Shameful. Well, not just sabotage it, they've been colluding. they've been colluding with Mr. Barnier all the way through this process. And, you know, I think they're acting against the national interest, but they're certainly acting against you because you, the people, despite all the threats, despite all the bullying, despite President Obama coming and telling us we'd be at the back of the queue, you voted Brexit. I'm staying in the Midlands. Burton-on-Trent, Uzuma, as a first-time caller, and welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Nigel. Great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So, you can see the dilemma that many MPs are in. What would you choose to do?
I would vote for the deal under the condition that Theresa May does not lead the next phase of the negotiations.
So get the deal through and then stand aside and get somebody else as Prime Minister?
Absolutely. Let's just leave, but she shouldn't lead the next phase of the negotiations, clearly, because all her decisions, both as Home Secretary and now as Prime Minister, in the short to long term, have been a disaster. She has a flawed decision-making process and fancies herself a great negotiator, which clearly she isn't.
You sound even more critical of what I've called the worst Prime Minister in my lifetime than I am. Thing is, Azuma, she's and I agree with you, by the way, about her period as Home Secretary too, but she's a sticker, isn't she? She doesn't seem to want to go anywhere. I mean, do you think if she said to, and she's speaking at 7 o'clock in 20 minutes' time to her own 1922 committee, so that room will be packed out. Do you think if she said, you know, vote for my deal, we'll get to March the 29th, I will then stand down as Prime Minister and you can vote for a new leader. Do you think if she said that, it might go through?
I think so. I honestly do. I think most of the backbench Conservatives realize that she's done and that she's been backed by a spineless cabinet. And it's as simple as that. So much as this is about Brexit, it's also a reflection of a lack of faith in her leadership as a whole. So if she goes, this deal goes through.
It's an interesting point.
And someone else.
It's an interesting point.
Next phase.
But the slight problem here is that this deal makes a series of legal commitments on the backstop, and could another leader just revoke all of that? I suppose the answer is, if you had the will, you could. Azuma, very interesting point of view. I hadn't thought of that. I have to say, I hadn't thought of that. But if she did say, look, March the 29th will be my last day as Prime Minister if you vote for this deal and we get Brexit, and then I'll hand over to somebody else. I really hadn't thought of that, but would it be enough, though? You see, looking at the numbers tonight, and I've mentioned Edward Lee, and there's John Mann from Labour, and there's half a dozen others who've now said they're going to back the deal. So it looks like she's still on course to lose by between 150 and 180. And we're still talking in historical terms, and I'll do more of this in the next few minutes, but in historical terms, one of the biggest defeats for a government ever. Would perhaps the prospect of her disappearing be enough to get the deal over the line? Don't know. Good point. Paul is a first-time caller from Uxbridge. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Nigel. And all the best to you, and a Happy New Year.
Thank you. And now your local MP.
Let's just hope that we have a happy England in the future.
Well, a happy United Kingdom, I hope, too, Paul. Now, Paul,
UK, sorry.
Yeah, no,
London boy.
So you've got Boris as your MP, have you, Paul?
Yeah, sadly.
Sadly?
Although I'm a long-term Conservative voter, we've emailed, we've tried everything, no answers, automated all the time for most politicians. What the average English voter wants to know is not about all the little ins and outs, is we voted out, we're out. If they go for a second referendum, well, it's the old saying, isn't it? If you don't like it, then you vote again. Well, if that's the case, then everyone can vote against every law that's been passed by Parliament because they don't like it.
Well, we could have endless elections, couldn't we?
We've got to accept the situation and we've got to deal with it. What? And if it means walking out of Brexit without a deal, well, we're an island.
Paul,
There's enough queuing up.
Paul, I would urge you this, as far as Boris is concerned, and he can be a bit inconsistent at times on policy, But he was on with Nick. I don't know whether you heard him this morning, on with Nick Ferrari. And he was on with Nick Ferrari this morning, and Nick was grilling him, and he was taking some calls. And the one thing Boris has done well is he has actually, since that Chequers deal emerged late last summer, he has, in a very principled way, has he not, stood down as Foreign Secretary, campaigned against the second referendum, and is now saying we should leave on WTO terms. I think Boris, actually, Paul, has been pretty faithful to you as a Brexit voter.
I'll be honest, as a constituent, he's been a damn good MP. But what I'm saying is, these MPs that got voted in, and their constituents voted them out of Europe, and they're voting to stay in, then it's a failure to do. All MPs are there to do what they got voted in by.
Well, they gave us the decision, Paul, and they told us they would implement it, and many of them don't want to. Thank you. Down to Camden to speak to Nick, another first-time caller to the show. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Yes, thank you.
So, should they back the deal? Is it the pragmatic, sensible thing to do, given there is a risk? Mrs May says, no Brexit at all, possibly. And I can see a scenario in which we could be forced to another referendum. So, what should they do?
Well, I think they should vote according to their consciences. I think we need a cross-party approach. And that going forward from that, I think they should really openly discuss the possibility of no Brexit or indefinitely postponing Brexit. They should initially vote according to what they think is good for the country, but they should really start debating all options openly.
Well, don't you think, Nick, that actually, given the sort of state of deadlock that we're likely to be in over the course of the next sort of week or so, isn't an extension of Article 50 perhaps the most likely outcome anyway?
I think it is, and I think instead of just saying this mantra all the time, we're leaving the EU on 29th of March, they should actually openly debate all the options, because I think this is what's really eroding people's faith in politicians. They hear all this nonsense coming out, these mantras and so on, and they should really be open about all the options. I mean, it's very unlikely now that we'll leave on the 29th anyway. Even the best case scenario, isn't it, of getting all the legislation through Parliament?
Yes, because it's not just the withdrawal bill. There are all sorts of other individual pieces of legislation she needs to get through. It is tough, even if she wins tomorrow, but I'm sure that it would be done. Nick, isn't the honest thing, given that Article 50 says you've got 2 years to negotiate a withdrawal agreement or you just leave, isn't the honest, faithful thing to do with the voters, and according to how MPs voted, just to leave on WTO terms? Isn't that the honest thing to do?
Well, yeah, but they've got to win. I mean, Brexiters have got to win the arguments. It's not just enough to keep citing the referendum. This is the biggest realignment since the Second World War. It's not just the referendum. They've got to win the argument as well. And you can't really expect, MPs or majority. If most MPs are against it, I think it's bad for the country.
Wow.
Half the country thinks it's bad. It's not going to reach escape velocity.
Nick, I think you're right. I have to say, I'm very happy with the WTO Brexit. I can't see Parliament allowing it, sadly. Nick, I thank you. I thank all of you thus far. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show at 6:46, and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Passionate disagreement in Parliament is nothing new, of course, but it's a very long time since a government lost a vote by more than 100 and said it looks like tomorrow they could be losing by as much as 180. The last time it happened was in 1924, when a minority Labour government led by Ramsay MacDonald lost by 166 votes. The circumstance is worth just thinking about very quickly. MPs were voting on an amendment to set up a committee to investigate the government's decision to drop criminal proceedings against J.R. Campbell, editor of the Communist Workers' Weekly, the newspaper the week before, having written an article encouraging the armed forces to mutiny. Government lost by 166. The next day, Ramsay Mac dissolved Parliament and lost the general election. So it's basically 100 years since a government has lost by 100 votes. They're now saying that if she only loses by 100, that could be quite a victory and could enable her to go and get more concessions. We will see. Pete is a first-time caller from Bristol. Pete, if you were there tomorrow and you were a Brexiteer, what's the sensible course of action?
Hi, evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for the call. I mean, basically, I think May's just walking around with a begging bowl at the moment. She's just trying to sort of get a few scrap voters in. But honestly, really, they're just saying after there's going to be no deal or second referendum. I mean, if no deal happens, then, we've got the way we wanted to go. Or if a second referendum, I say we just do it all again. I mean, we vote leave for a second time. They've got no choice. What else can they do?
It was interesting. I saw Craig Oliver at the weekend, who, of course, was sort of David Cameron's political mastermind behind his referendum campaign. And Oliver was interviewed in one of the Sunday newspapers, and he said if there was a second referendum for the Leave campaign, it's easy. Because all they have to say to the electorate is, this isn't just about the issue, this is about the political class ignoring you first time round. Now is your chance to teach them a lesson. So do you think, Pete, as I do, that if we did get to and what a terrible waste of time and energy and how divisive it would be and bad for investment, but if we did get to a second referendum, do you agree with me that Leave would win it by a bigger margin?
I mean, if we really want to remove any sort of the division, I think we should make it mandatory. I mean, I know we don't have that, and I'm sure it'll be very difficult to implement that, but we should make it mandatory. Anyone that's of voting age or voting possibility, just do it. I think they do it in Australia or something like that.
Yeah, but that would need huge constitutional change. That's a very difficult thing to do. Isn't the point, Pete, that we were told it was our decision and it would be implemented? That was a promise from across the political class to the people of this country, and that is what many MPs are now trying to break.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be very interesting with the votes tomorrow. I mean, what do we even know? Maybe some of these MPs are sort of taking money from the EU or something like that, and that's maybe they'll vote sort of with that agenda. How do we know?
Well, Pete, I don't know, but it looks like she's going to lose. But if a second referendum comes, then your attitude is, let's take him on again and win again, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
I mean, at the moment, I just think it's basically if any of them are taking any money, I think it's basically treasonous at the moment. Would you say that? Would you, like, if people are taking money from other countries that are affecting their vote on our country, would you say that's like treasonous?
Pete, I'm not going to get drawn into using the T word. I'll let other people do it, but I do understand passions are running very, very high. Thank you. A lot of you asking Catty on Facebook. Nigel, you said this morning, that was on ITV, that you'd be back if we're betrayed. Do you stand by this? And what are you going to do next if Brexit doesn't happen? I get on Twitter. Look, let me make it clear. If we are forced to a second referendum, I will give it my all to make sure that we win again by a margin big enough that it can't be ignored. Although I do suspect that what we need isn't just Brexit. I think we need a complete change of our party political system in this country. It's perfectly clear, isn't it, that our political party system and Parliament just can't cope with this result. They're so out of kilter with this population, not just on Brexit, but many other issues too. Alan is a first-time caller from Belfast. Good evening, Alan.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. Are you reassured that His Excellency, Mr Juncker, and His Excellency, Mr Barnier, have said that they don't intend for the Irish backstop to be anything more than time limited? Are you reassured by that?
Most certainly I am not. The EU in the island of Ireland has always been seen as a vehicle to unify Ireland by the back door. And the Irish have been independent for 100 years and they're still hanging around our coattails and they're holding us all back. And that's the view of people in Northern Ireland. And anybody in Northern Ireland who holds that view are poo-pooed and kowtowed down for the simple reason is we're not part of the great liberal elite, the Good Friday apparatchiki, who keep holding up the Irish border as this great thing. The Irish refused to police it since 1922, and it might be a line in a map, but where business and economics are concerned, everything in Northern Ireland is to the benefit of the UK. The Irish just slip in and slip out and slip in and slip out. They're the ones that are going to suffer. That's why they want to hold you to ransom.
If it was a WTO Brexit, of course, then Varadkar would have shot himself in the foot, wouldn't he, really? Because that would actually, on agricultural products with big tariff, really hurt them. Alan, answer me one quick question. Sinn Féin 10 years ago were implacably opposed to the European Union because they were Irish nationalists. Why is Sinn Féin now pro-EU? What on earth's happened there?
Could I give you a history?
No, I'm asking for about four. I want about 4 words from you because time is very short. But what is it that has changed Sinn Féin's position? Because had we had the unionist parties and Sinn Féin campaigning for Brexit, Northern Ireland would have been probably the most Eurosceptic part of the whole country. What changed Sinn Féin?
They've been infiltrated by MI5 and MI6 for years. And all those people at the top of Sinn Féin are in the pay of the British Secret Service, and the British Secret Service and the British political establishment
will do
anything to stop bombs
I think,
it's
Alan.
One huge.
I disagree, Alan. I think it's all to do with European money. But hey, Alan, I'm going to move on. I've got time for one last caller very quickly. Mark from Great Yarmouth. Mark, you're a Tory MP. You've got a choice tomorrow. Do you take a bit of Brexit or do you risk the whole lot?
No, Nigel, this deal is not good for this country. It's not Brexit at all, as well, you know it. And then what I might want to say on this as well, Nigel, is I do detect that you seem to be wanting to go back to the European Parliament. You seem to don't want this Brexit to happen in full.
Mark, get out of it. I've had 20 years there. I'm sick to death of it. I want to leave. I want to be there.
I respect that, Nigel. But can I just say one thing?
Go on.
You was on there talking about Vince Cable and about how much you like him. You remember this man has called us all racists, and I'm not a racist, Nigel. Mm-hmm. He's called us all racists, all of us, together. He's derogatory, the names that he's called people has been very derogatory.
Mark, believe it or not, and I know I'm known for a few YouTube speeches where I tease unelected European bureaucrats and commissioners, but I generally like to think that we can conduct really strong political discourse with a degree of civility towards each other. So the big question is a bad deal better than no deal? Well, to me, the answer's no. When this comes to the European Parliament, I'll vote against it, and I think many will tomorrow too. I'll be back at 6 tomorrow. At 10 tonight's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
You big fat Remainer, Nigel.
No, it's not really Brexit, Ian, is it?
No, it really isn't. I mean, apparently